OK, let's get to it then, and let's look at that headline in The Observer. Checkmate. Gone in 39 days as far as Ange Postecoglou is concerned. 39 days, 8 winless games. Jonathan, was this a feeling of inevitability that he was going to get the sack? And is there a degree of sympathy for Ange Postecoglou here?
Yeah, I mean, it was a disaster from start to finish, really. I thought Forest actually in those 8 games played some very decent football. I mean, this is the irony, that they have looked quite bright for long periods of those games. That they've produced passages of football that they weren't really doing. They were creating chances. But I think, you know, the issue with Postecoglou's style of football and him as a coach is that he's a guy who's so fixated on the long-term project that often his teams neglect like the basics of football. You have to defend your set pieces. You have to put away your chances. And I think that was ultimately what it did for him. If you're coming into a team in mid-season and you're totally trying to change that style of play, you can argue that he needed more time. I would argue that 39 days isn't anywhere near enough time to judge what he can do long term with those players. But equally, the fact that Forest had so clearly regressed and that they were neglecting really basic elements of football, I think that's ultimately what did for him.
Martin, Jonathan alluded to it there. It is only 39 days. It was only 8 games in all competitions. Did he actually deserve a bit more time from Evangelos Marinakis?
Yeah, you know, you can't say 8 days. You've had a chance to really implement too much. The only thing I would say with Marinakis is he's made a mistake and he's tried to correct it as quick as he can. If you're going to say it's his mistake, it's his mess, he's created it, and now he's trying to fix it. It's an absolutely brutal way of trying to fix it. But he could have carried on. You could carry on down this path, and you think, well, things will get better. Things will get better. Things don't always get better. Avon Grant went to West Ham. Things didn't get better. West Ham got relegated. You know, people come into clubs. Things don't get better. Mick McCarthy's great quote about, oh, that's nice. Yeah, lovely. But you know,
sorry.
Sorry. It's a good album, Moon Safari. We like Moon Safari. We could play that. But I can't remember where I was. I know where I was. Oh, where I was. Yeah. Mick McCarthy's great where people say, "Oh, it can't carry on like this, can it?" And he went, "Yeah, it can." and that's the fear. And falling off a cliff. Which is what getting relegated from the Premier League is like, particularly for a club like Nottingham Forest, where they've invested so much money. I can understand why he acted when he acted. It's his mistake in the first place, but I can understand why he acted because they will be. They're in the bottom 3 now. They're in the bottom 3 now. They weren't in you know. Nuno didn't leave because anyone thought they were going to get relegated. Nuno left because he couldn't get on with Edu. You know, he'd fallen out with the hierarchy at the club. He didn't leave because everyone thought Forest were going down, and now suddenly everyone thinks Forest are going down.
Dan, Martin mentions it was Marinakis' mistake, and John Percy in The Telegraph, he actually says, look, Marinakis' move to sack Postecoglou is a clear sign that he accepts that he got it wrong. Dismissing the 60-year-old was the only response he could make after another heavy defeat and to spark a swift turnaround. We do know that results are currency, and he hasn't got them in those first 8 games. But was it too much pressure too soon for Ange Postecoglou, and how it was portrayed when he came into the club? Because this is a manager who has come in, whose style and philosophy is almost the complete opposite of what his predecessor was, and yet there was no pre-season for him to get that style and that philosophy across.
Yeah, I mean, I think John Percy's been a bit more sympathetic to Marinakis and some of the other inside pieces today, but Postecoglou walked into a situation, I think, that was always going to be so difficult. You know, not only was he coming into a club where he was trying to change the style of play dramatically from counter-punching to kind of possession-based front-foot football, but he was doing it when they were in Europe, when he had 3 days between games, no pre-season. And this is always a tough job for a manager, and it's a particularly tough job when no one really wants you to make those changes. When he came into Spurs, the club was kind of scarred by Mourinho ball and Conte, and they were desperate for that change. They wanted a new style. Forest players and Forest fans loved Nuno. He was a hero who led them back into Europe for the first time in 30 years. No one really wanted a dramatic change. So I think the odds were always against Postecoglou succeeding. He kind of gambled on himself, I think, and lost, I guess. But as a counterpoint, I'm reminded that Iraola won once, I think, in his first 9 games at Bournemouth. So there is an example of giving a manager time to implement his methods, to change his style of play. But I've got to say, I kind of agree with Martin. I watched most of the Spurs games last season, and there were many points where I thought, this is the nadir, and it got worse from there. I think the game yesterday had a lot of the hallmarks that we saw at Tottenham last season. Forest conceded 2 quickly after the break. That happened a lot at Spurs. They conceded all 3, I think, from set pieces or from a second phase after a set piece. So, it did feel like the same patterns were repeating. And
if you look at the run of fixtures that he's had, it's not like you can go, well, but have a look at who he's had to play. First game's Arsenal away, so he's playing the best team in the country at the moment, away from home, so you don't judge a man on that. But after that, if you're looking at Swansea in the League Cup, Midtjylland,
Burnley, Sunderland.
These aren't. He hasn't had this nightmare run of fixtures. He's had some what you would think would be for Nottingham Forest, a team that are in the Europa League, however they got there. He's had a very winnable run of fixtures. And you look at some of the players. I'm watching it yesterday, and I'm thinking,
it's a strange team yesterday.
Douglas, but you look at some of the individuals. Douglas Luiz, you're thinking, he's a player. Yeah. This guy's a player. Elliot Anderson is a player. You shouldn't be in this much trouble with those guys like that in your team.
When you take on a job mid-season, or at this point in the season, there is always going to be problems. But this is about as good a situation as you can realistically expect to walk into. This is a team that's almost qualified for the Champions League. It doesn't have a huge amount wrong with it. You have one of the best young midfielders in the world in Anderson. You have Gibbs-White. You have Hudson-Odoi. You have a defence that was one of the best in the league last season. So when he goes on about, I'm going to completely change this, why? Why are you completely changing the way we play? Also, why you keep talking about Spurs last season?
That's on Marinakis, though. You can't bring in a manager who is very well known for a distinctive style of football and then expect him to carry on his predecessors.
No, but
style.
John's point about banging on about Spurs, which he did on Friday. I know he's defending his record, and I know you can imagine what it's like if you feel the rooms against you. You're 20 on 1 or whatever, and so you sort of overstate your case a bit. But Nottingham Forest fans couldn't give a monkeys about whether he gave the players a day off after they won the Europa League or not. They really couldn't. They just want to win some football matches.
But does he have a point, though? Going back to that news conference, because he feels that his first season at Tottenham Hotspur was almost forgotten, and everyone's focusing on what happened last season in a season where he won a trophy.
I think he did have a point there, but it's kind of irrelevant now, right? He's reopening a debate about a season 2 years ago. I think he's right to say that Spurs probably overachieved that year, given they lost Kane, given he changed the style of play, given he came from Conte and it was a disastrous season. But who cares now?
Ange gets a huge amount of disrespect, right, from the media, from fans. Do you know who else gets a huge amount of disrespect? Every single person in the Premier League, every coach, every player. This is the Premier League, right? There is a huge amount of scrutiny. Absolutely. There was a huge amount of comment. Things that you say are going to be misrepresented. People are going to try and make you look bad. That is just the nature of the sport. And the strong coaches, the strong-willed coaches, actually deal with it. I think he's shown quite a thin skin in a lot of his
people
reactions.
Get booed into the job now, don't they? I mean, people used to get booed out of a job, and they now get booed into the job. Which is almost what happened with Postecoglou, where people go, I don't fancy this bloke. I don't. You look at the amount of managers that are appointed now with this sort of chorus of disapproval from the fans about, who's this bloke? What's he ever won? What's he ever done? It happened when Arsene Wenger went to, so it's not a completely new thing, but it's much more prevalent now, as John says, about the level of disrespect.
Stylistically, I do wonder if, through no fault of his own really, Postecoglou has arrived in the Premier League kind of 5-10 years too late. You know, he's had to claw his way up from the relative backwater of Australian football, which is to his immense credit. But, you know, we're now in a Premier League where, you know, Man City play a lot of direct balls to Erling Haaland. Arsenal are arguably the best team in the league but can't win without set pieces. Everyone's doing long throws, and Postecoglou, by his own admission, just isn't interested in coaching set pieces. He's not interested in the dark arts, and I don't think the Premier League was like this, you know, 5-6 years ago. Maybe his kind of big picture approach would have been more effective then, but he's in a new landscape now.
Jonathan mentioned it before about when you're replacing Nuno, why change everything with all of the players in the squad that he had. Tom Colomossi's piece in the Mail on Sunday, he talks about inside Ange's 39-day disaster, and he says, look, he was already a risky choice. Nuno was trying to turn Forest into a team more comfortable controlling possession. It was still a leap from Nuno 2.0 to Ange ball, and so it has proved. So with that in mind, is there too much blame being attached and too much criticism being attached to Ange Postecoglou compared to the decision maker to make a decision where you bring in a manager who is such at odds to the previous incumbent?
Totally. I mean, it was Brian Clough who said that when an owner sacks a manager, they should also sack themselves because they're the ones who've made the decision. I think there's a huge amount of blame. You've got to put on Marinakis for this. But we saw, this was the whole conversation we had about whether he can adapt, right? We saw in the Europa League run that he could very clearly put out a team to get a result. And I think for whatever reason, even though we had almost a squad of players that was perfect for doing that, just get 6 or 8 games under your belt. Just grind out a few results. Just look solid, and then build from there. Then you can sort of, you can slowly integrate your principles and your style of play into the squad. But it's always been this kind of all or nothing. You're with me or you're not. And if you don't get what I'm trying to do, then you're an idiot or you're sort of biased against Australians or something. It's always been this kind of this zero-sum game that you have to be totally all in. And I think that's what got him to the Premier League. But I think that's also slightly how the Premier League's found him out a little bit.
Has Ange Postecoglou got a future in the Premier League?
Not for a little while, I wouldn't have thought. Not for a little while. I can't see. This is. It's quite a bad one. This. Not to win a game. I mean, when you're comparing the other shortest runs and stuff like that, people aren't going out with a 0% winning record. So it's not good. I felt sorry for him over the Tottenham thing. I really did feel sorry for him that winning a trophy at Tottenham didn't matter in the end to the management, and they didn't give him another season. But I totally get why he didn't get that other season. So I do feel sorry for him in that respect, but not so much over this job. I feel sympathy for him with the last one.
I'd love to see him in the Bundesliga. I think that, like what Dan's saying about the style of play, I think that the Bundesliga would really suit him. Like clean break, fresh start.
Mm.
Dan, just referring to the Sunday Telegraph, obviously Ange gone, but now they're going to talk about who comes in at the City Ground. John Percy and Jason Bird are talking about, as are many others, Roberto Mancini and Sean Dyche.
Yeah.
Are they similar managers again, or and who is the right choice?
I think that arguably encapsulates the problem with Marinakis in a nutshell, really. He's lurched from Nuno to Postecoglou, who are chalk and cheese in terms of style, and seemingly Forest have at the top of their shortlist 2 managers who are, again, very, very different, which suggests muddled thinking and that Marinakis doesn't know what kind of club he wants Nottingham Forest to be. I suppose if you're being really generous, you could say Dyche might be the short-term pick just to kind of save them from relegation. As Martin said, that they're in it now. Insofar as there is a relegation battle, and maybe Mancini, if they were thinking, okay, let's build something over a slightly longer term, then he's the choice, and maybe they're still deciding that. But look, they're very different managers. I think Marinakis always goes for managers who are out of work. He doesn't like the kind of business of negotiating with other clubs, so perhaps that's why these 2 are top of the shortlist. But it doesn't suggest to me a club that kind of knows its place and where what kind of club it wants to be.
He's got a director of football. Edu is the director of football for over this whole group. And that's what you don't understand in many ways. The Nuno, the split with Nuno, is because he can't work with Edu. So you think, so where is if the shortlist is Sean Dyche and Roberto Mancini, where's the director of football in that? I think Victoria Wood had a routine about when she was at school and everyone being on a diet and someone going into town, oh, could you get us a strawberry yoghurt? And the girl would come back and say, oh, I couldn't get a strawberry yoghurt, so I got you a meat and potato pie. And that is what this is. It's, it's strawberry yoghurt or meat and potato pie. There's
Wondering where that was going.
I couldn't possibly say. By the way, if they think Roberto Mancini is any less fractious than any other manager, they've got another thing coming.
Jonathan, the fact that Sean Dyche is up there among the favourites to take over from Ange Postecoglou, does it reflect a real worry from Evangelos Marinakis that there's a real potential that Nottingham Forest could go down in their current state?
Yeah, I think the decision, the fact that Dyche is in the frame, if they hire Dyche, I think that's a big tell that Marinakis does feel that they're in a relegation scrap, because I don't think there's any other reason to hire Sean Dyche. I think Everton found this, that they were in really, really deep trouble. Dyche got them out of trouble, but when they wanted to move to the next level, they had to move on from Dyche, because that is the level of football, the style of football that he is ultimately wedded to. He's a guy who will get you to win your battles, and it'll keep you tight, but he is not going to take you to the next level. Mancini, I think, is a much more interesting appointment, because he's been managing in Saudi Arabia. But he's not managed in a big league for, I think, at least 5 or 6 years. So I think there's a bit of an unknown there. Does he still have the fire in him? Is he still, is he still up to date with the modern game? But I think if they can unlock, that fire in him, I think the ceiling with him is a lot higher, because we know what he can do in the game.
What's your gut feeling? Where do you think they'll go?
I think.
It's an impossible question, isn't it?
Well, funnily enough, when he left his seat yesterday, Marinakis, you're sitting there thinking, I wonder if he's on the phone to somebody, as we speak. I mean, there was stuff about the fans singing "Sacked in the Morning." I thought I heard him sing "Sacked in a Minute." But that just might have been, I might have a good imagination. But I thought they were singing "Sacked in a Minute" at one stage, and I'm thinking, this guy could be. The chairman looks like he's on the phone to somebody. Sean Dyche has been linked all week. I'm sort of with John that if they think they're going down, they might not want to roll the dice again on somebody who might have, shall we say, ideas, rather than just go, right, this is how we sort this out. And, because it's a good team. It's a good team. There's no way Forest should be in relegation trouble. No way at all.
Last season, when you had the three newly promoted, or the last 2 seasons, when it looked like the 3 newly promoted clubs couldn't cope, you might have made a more adventurous pick. But now that Sunderland, Burnley and Leeds all look competitive, everyone looks pretty competitive, it's a much more precarious situation for them.
Yeah, I mean, we're match day 8, aren't we? Round 8 of fixtures, and none of the promoted clubs are in the bottom 3 at the moment. Do you think that would have been a factor, not only for Forest, but also for West Ham?
West Ham, without a shadow of a doubt. West Ham thought they were going down. Look, Leicester thought they were going down. Under Ranieri, Leicester were genuinely worried in that second season they were going down. I still think it was the most ungrateful decision I've ever seen in my life. I couldn't fathom it. But they thought they were going down. When Chelsea sacked Mourinho the second time, they thought they were going down.
That would have been brilliant.
I mean, but they genuinely thought they could get relegated. And that fear is huge. With the various, all the PSR stuff and everything. A club like Forest, with the money that Marinakis has spent falling into the Championship, could be really, really bad for them.